Hello, gamers and gamer-friendly viewers. It is Wednesday, and yesterday, this study from the Pew Research Center, which has been pretty good so far, historically pretty good when it comes to games research, brought out this study about gaming and gamers. And I thought I'd go through it with you guys because I think overall, this study is a net positive. I was very, very pleased by the numbers in it, and I want to show you why. But I also want to issue a couple of caveats about this study. Now, everybody knows that just because we think something is a good study doesn't mean we think it's a perfect. I'll agree with this. Yes, good. Okay. So, something people should know before we go into it is that the author of this study, Maeve Duggan, apologies, was using the GG auto blocker tool for a large portion of yesterday, the day this study came out. And the reason this is relevant is because the GG auto blocker tool, the reason it's called the GG auto blocker tool is because it is designed to block people who follow certain high profile Gamergate participants on Twitter. Oh, the dreaded Gamergate. This tool does not distinguish between somebody who only follows people supportive of the pro Gamergate side. It does not distinguish that from people who follow the most prominent pro Gamergaters as well as the most prominent anti Gamergaters, which is what I was doing, which is how I ended up on this list. So I am now blocked by every single anti-Gamergate person who thinks that everybody that even listens to a Gamergate person on Twitter is curious about what they have to say, is automatically a supporter and automatically a harasser. This is what the tool was claimed to do, and the worst harassers on the internet. And for some odd reason, that list was up to 13,000 people the last time I checked before I decided I just didn't care anymore. And I'm sure you can imagine that that's an indicator that a lot of people like myself got caught in that net. And I know from my own experiences with this auto blocker tool that it not only is used by biased people, but it automatically creates a bias on the user's Twitter feed. It shuts off not just the supporters of one side, but people who are neutral on the issue or undecided and wanted to hear from both sides. So basically it blocks anybody with actively an open mind who is interested in the controversy. Now, I think that the mindset of someone who would use a tool like this, I'm quite disappointed that a statistician would use a tool like this because it's so poorly designed and because it does some yucky things. I'm not opposed to people wanting to keep their Twitter feed quieter. That one is not well designed. I don't personally use block tools. I find they create more problems than they solve. If someone's a problem, I mute them. The only exception to that is when I actually have to report an account, and then it sort of blocks by default. And I think that if someone is actually like uttering threats and things like that, yes, they should be blocked. But that's pretty much what you have to do to, you either have to be committing open slander that is disproven and you won't stop, because I just don't want to see that. And I don't want to communicate with somebody who lies about people knowingly. But you basically have to threaten someone or refer to a threat. You know what I mean by refer to a threat. It's not something that the police would claim was a threat, but there are ways of threatening people without it's threat to the people that aren't informed. Anyway, I'm saying that is my personal bias on this issue. So obviously, Maeve Duggan and I are going to come at this data from different perspectives, just based on that. That's a big, fundamental aspect of internet character right there. Now, that being said, I think the data itself, the raw numbers, are still pretty solid. Now, there are some who will disagree with me, and I want to present their viewpoint so that people can come at this and make their own decisions. Okay, I'm not telling anybody how to think here. I'm telling you where I'm coming from with the numbers. Feel free to disagree. This is a new study. We're all just getting it. Okay, more brains on this one is better. But I think the numbers are still good. The disagreement is one very smart person objected to the sheer number of landlines that were used in this study. And he said that it would skew the results in favor of non-gamers. Now, I see where he's coming from, but I think that for people who don't follow statistics and things like that, the question of landlines versus cell phones is one of these things that statisticians constantly run up against, because someone who only has a cell phone is more likely to be part of a particular demographic, younger, more tech savvy, etc., than someone who still has a landline. And so the argument is that by using landlines, you're more likely to get someone who is less aware of games. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for the purposes of this study. And I'll show you instances where I think, that actually benefited us in a backdoor way. Like I said, I'm very excited about these numbers. So let's dig in with those caveats out of the way. I just wanted to present this stuff, not to throw shade on the survey person, not to criticize her decision to use a block bot. I just want all the information I consider to be relevant out on the table before we begin, because again, I'm using this as a tool to get you guys to think critically about this study, not necessarily to take my word for it. And yes, I have put it in the description box below this video. So the first thing is, of the people surveyed, 51% didn't play video games. Okay. I suspect this study was aiming for like a 50-50 split of people who played games and people who didn't play games. 38% of people played games but don't identify as gamers. 10% of people identify as gamers. So 10% is a pretty major chunk of the population. It's pretty major. I don't know where the other 1% went. We have 49% as 10% plus 38%. So I guess it was slightly more than 10 and slightly more than 38. I don't know. But the interesting thing, and yes, play video games is involving a portable device like a cell phone. That's one question a lot of people use. What defines a game? But that might be why 38% of people play games but don't identify as gamers. Most people consider gamers play on console or PC. I do know, however, an increasing number of people who are app game aficionados, and they are, hardcore consumers of mobile gaming. The iOS version of Five Nights at Freddy's and stuff like that. Clash of Clans. There's some pretty involving mobile games coming out, so I expect these numbers to move. But the thing that's interesting about these demographic breakdowns is in this paragraph here. A majority of American adults, 60%, believe that most people who play video games are men, a view that is shared by 57% of women who themselves play video games. Now, the reality is it's somewhere around here that it was, there we go. A nearly identical share of men and women report ever playing video games. Okay, so this is an indication, and this is why I like numbers like this, of work we still need to do, okay? The data that men and women play games equally, according to the study, conflicts with the perception that most people who play video games are men. Not most gamers are men. Most people who play video games are men. So we have, and this shouldn't be hard because the facts are on our side. The evidence is on our side that and this is consistent with these other surveys that people are like, oh, they mean mobile games. Well, that still means you play games. Okay. We keep getting these numbers at 42% to 48% of people who play and consume video games, by consume I mean spend money on them, are women. And yet the perception is still that it's mostly men who play games. So we can move the needle on this one. Men are more than twice as likely as women to call themselves gamers, 15% versus 6%. Among those 18 to 29, 33% of men say the term gamer describes them well, more than 3 times the proportion of young women who say the same. This does not surprise me in the least, and I have been getting into this more and more on this channel. I don't believe that it's because women play games less than men. I believe the social stigma against women who play video games is higher than men who play video games because of that perception that it is weird, that gaming is something for men. And so women who play games, again, why do you do that? Like, I've had people do that. Like, when I say, I play video games for a living, I work in gaming, I'm a video game writer, reporter. Really? Why? Well, why do you work in marketing? Well, because I get paid. That's why. Like, what do you mean, why? And this is the thing. I think that identity is a fragile thing, and a lot of people's identity is made up of what's going to be the path of least resistance in life. And if we make it harder for women to self-identify as gamers, then fewer women are going to self-identify as gamers, right? These numbers don't surprise me at all. However, this means we have 6% of women. Now, keep in mind, this is of, the people who play games. I don't even know if this is of the people who play games or the whole study. So I don't know if half or all of it here. But we've still got 6% and growing who call themselves gamers. Now, the minute we hit 10% market share, it's relevant. That's the magic number in a lot of cases. When you get 10% market share, then you matter. And we're at 10% market share as gamers. So we are a block. Our opinions matter. And the larger that number grows, the less advantageous it's going to be for non-gaming business people and politicians and activists to use gamers as an easy demonized group, as an easy scapegoat for all the ills of the world, because our money's worth something. And I mean, don't forget, in a lot of advertising, you're advertising to a niche of a niche. Everything's so fragmented now. So if you can reach 10% of people easily, that's pretty powerful. And like I said, that number is going to grow because of the fact that 18 to 29, a full third of men say they're gamers. That's huge. Now, what it also means is we can grow the number of women. But 33% of men gaming, that's a lot of dudes under the, and as, older people die off over the decades and the high end of gamers age up, that number is going to grow. That's a huge number. 33% of men say gamer describes them well. Massive, massive, okay? This one, 4 in 10 adults believe that violence in video games are related to violent behavior. Again, good, because it tells us what we need to still continue to do work educating people. We know that scientifically, this question is answered. Okay, people who play violent video games are more likely to be violent themselves, was the question asked. I think that's the wrong question. I think it's the wrong question because are people who are prone to violence more likely to play violent video games? Yes. Does that mean every person who plays a violent video game is prone to violence? No. The question that really matters is, do violent video games cause violent behavior? That is the question. In the US, it doesn't matter because it's seen as protected speech, In other places, it does matter because if there's a causal link, free speech is not going to protect people in countries without the strong free speech protections that we have in the United States. Free speech protections in the United States that are stronger even than we have in Canada. But there's no likelihood of video games being censored in Canada anytime soon, so we don't have to worry about it either. However, we do need to do a better job educating people because we know that playing violent video games does not increase violent thoughts, does not increase the risk of being violent. There is a temporary increase in aggression. Aggression and violence are not the same thing. But 40% of people still agree that there is a relationship between video games and violent behavior. Now, again, the question matters here. Because if I was asked, is there a relationship between video game violence and violent behavior? It's like, is there a relationship? I mean, people who want to blow someone's head off in real life are probably going to enjoy doing it in a video game. Do video games cause violence? No. So the way this question was asked might have skewed the results. Just saying. Now, that being said, doesn't hurt to continue to hammer the point home to make it that violent video games do not lead to an increase in violent thoughts and behavior. They don't. This has been studied to death. They don't. We have scientific consensus on this. Yes, there are outlier studies. Those studies have been shown to be flawed. This should be done. It's not. So we have to keep beating that drum. We have to keep repeating the message that violent video games do not cause violence behavior. They don't encourage violent behavior. But people who are going to be violent will consume violent video games. It's not the same thing. And for the record, I consume violent video games. I do not only play violent video games. I love non-violent video games as well. But I personally get really upset in the Lego games when the little Lego guy flies into the little pieces of Lego, or in Disney Infinity when the toy falls apart. That actually upsets me more than somebody's head getting blown off in a video game, because that simulated violence doesn't look a thing like real violence, whereas it actually does look like a toy breaking, and I get sad. So a little bit about me. This next part is the part that I don't even know why some of these questions were asked. But it's still interesting. I still think there's a lot of positives to take away from the attitudes of the general public. Now, that includes gamers and non-gamers. Keep in mind, right? I don't know why a survey would ask, when there's a study with 51% of people who don't play video games, whether video games are a waste of time. Okay? 51% of people are going to say yes, very likely. And what are the numbers we got? Are a waste of time. True for most games. Yeah. Half of people who don't play video games said they're a waste of time. If you asked 51% non-sports fans whether watching sports are a waste of time, they're going to say yes. Okay? True for some games, not for others. This is good. The fact that only half of the people that don't play video games think they're a waste of time, that's good. But I don't know why the question's worthwhile. Same thing is, are video games a better form of entertainment than TV? You can't compare media. You can't say, is radio better than television? Is television better than video games? Are movies better than TV? This is a question of preference. Better form of entertainment? There is no such thing as a better form of entertainment. Some people would say, live theater is a better form of entertainment because there'll be mistakes. But that's absolutely subjective, right? Most people consume multiple forms of entertainment, so whether someone thinks video games are a better form of entertainment than TV is not relevant. The question is, will you consume video games? I watch TV. I personally would answer true for most games. Are video games, a better form of entertainment than television? If I was said, do you want to play Grand Theft Auto or do you want to watch a Quentin Tarantino movie? I'd play Grand Theft Auto, and I'm not a fan of that series. So I'm, and once again, huzzah, 10% of people-ish said, they're gamers, 11% gaming is a better form of entertainment than TV. These numbers are not surprising. The thing that gives me hope are these two questions in the middle. Now remember, 51% of the people asked, do not play video games. However, only a minority said that the two pro-social questions that help develop good problem-solving skills, which is a pro-cognitive question, or the promote teamwork and communication, which is a pro-social question, only 16% and 23% respective said it is not true that games have these beneficial abilities. Now that's awesome, considering 51% of people don't play video games. So we have half of non-gamers with an open mind. That's awesome. That's huge, because that means that education and outreach programs can work. We have half of the existing non-gaming population who still has an open mind about games. And these numbers get even better when we get into that much controversial question about women and minorities in gaming. Now, these numbers thrilled me. Now, I wish this survey would have asked every question either negatively or every question positively, because the problem is, are games a waste of time? That's a negative statement. Help develop good problem-solving skills. That's a positive statement. I wish they were all, are a good use of time, as opposed to are a waste of time. like pick one. I'd prefer that. Like, I would like to see portray women poorly, portray women well, portray minorities poorly, portray women poorly. I'd like to see both numbers. I'd like to see the positive and the negative, or just positives or just negatives, because the questions can lead. And that's when we get into the bias of the person doing the survey question again. Still, a lot of good things. Percentage of adults, and no, public unsure if video games portray minorities and women poorly. Now, going in, one would think that with all the bad press gaming has gotten over the last couple years, I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of the non-gaming public would say, yeah, video games treat women and minorities poorly. I was thrilled that it seemed like that indoctrination has not taken hold. Only 14% said that most games portray women poorly. Only 9% said that most games portray minorities poorly. And you have to remember, this is in the face of videos that were viewed millions and millions and millions of times that are essentially clip reels saying that tropes in video games are versus women. They are against us. And it's this bombardment of every popular game under the sun has gotten whacked on this thing one way or another. Still, only 14% of people drank the Kool-Aid. Only 14% actually believe that women are portrayed poorly in most games. This is amazing. This is amazing. Even the some games, but not others, is not that high. And I think we're all willing to say, yes, some games don't do a very good job portraying women. And portraying women poorly can mean everything from hypersexualization to objectification, or just the character was written like shit, right? Like, what does that question mean? I don't know. But there are good games and there are bad games. There are some games that we all sort of have to admit, yeah, not the best job there. Again, doesn't mean the games are harmful, just, yeah, not a really good depiction of women right there. But the unsure numbers thrilled me to bits, considering, we only have that 10% of people who are consider themselves gamers, right? So, the rest could be playing things like Temple Run or Candy Crush Saga or something like that. Still, more than just the gamers say it's not true for most games that women are portrayed poorly. But this unsure number thrills me. Again, it means we have a huge portion. These numbers are huge, especially with non-gamers. The number there's a huge portion of the population who has not made up their minds. They still have an open mind. They are willing to be convinced that women and minorities are welcome in video games. That thrills me. Okay? Thrills me. And for people that need to know why it thrills me, well, it's because I had expected these numbers, the true for most games, to be much higher, considering 51% of the people surveyed don't play video games. We don't know how many of the people who play games play console games. And there has been this epic media narrative in, things like the New York Times, ABC News, mainstream media publications say, and even progressive publications like Progressive Conservative, they all hit on games for different reasons. But only 14% and 9% believe that games treat women and minorities poorly. And it's funny because I personally think that games could show non-white people as not minorities. I'd like to see, people who don't have white skin shown in their cultures. I think there's opportunities. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying it's a golden opportunity for game developers to, it's these new stories that you can tell in other cultures. But yeah, these are great. These are great numbers. And I'm going to borrow bother with the rest of this page because, you know, the next thing is compared to those who don't play video games, game players are more likely to agree with the positives and disagree with the negatives. So the people that actually have an informed opinion are more positive on gaming. Yeah, that's common sense. Okay. But this 40% and 47% unsure number on the women and minorities question is amazing. It's amazing. It's a huge opportunity. The violence question, huge opportunity as well. These are huge opportunities, guys. This is great news. This is great news. It means that we can take a positive approach, an informative approach, a confident approach. And instead of having to fight, all we need to do is educate. I'm willing to give up that 14 and 9% respectively, right? How much is it for violence at games again? We'll find. Here we are. Okay, so no, that's not it. Where is it? Violence. Disagree with the statement. There's no graph. I need graph. But it seems we actually have a bigger problem with the violence in games than the sexism in games. That's astounding. That is astounding. So this tells us that, yeah, violence in video games is still of the greatest concern when it comes to smears against the industry. But I think with the minorities and women question, I'm willing to give up 14% and 9%. Those are small minorities, and those can be explained by people with a political position. You know, they won't be convinced. But, you know, that and the 18 and 23% who say it's not true for most games, well, we don't have to convince them. We have to give them the tools to continue to advocate for games. But this 67% in both, wow, it's exactly 67% in both cases, who in either believe it's true for some games and not others, or are not sure. These are people that can be reached. And people like this with an open mind will not be reached by screaming. They'll be reached by talking. Positive portrayals, praising when developers get it right, cheering on when someone does something really cool with a character or an inclusive gameplay mechanic or a game that doesn't tell the same old story over and over and over again. And that isn't just, you know, hang on, white, heterosexual, cisgendered male guys. I'm not singling you out here, okay? It could even be about a white dude in a different circumstance, right? Let's just broaden the appeal of games. Let's educate people on the true spectrum of games that are out there. Because that means they're going to stop attacking the shooters that we all know and love. Because, hey, people don't care if that's just one type of game. They care if it seems like it's the majority of games. And that makes sense, right? I mean, that makes sense. And so this really gives me a lot to work on. And this is so useful. Because if people are open to being convinced, then you don't go in there, rah, there's a talking point. No, we don't do that. We don't hit them over the head. We do the equivalent of sitting down to coffee with them and have a pleasant, fact-driven conversation about video games. That's amazing. The amazing thing about this study, and what makes it even better, is it is potentially biased against gamers. I said potentially. It gives us a roadmap to the people who are willing to be convinced. I love it. I love it. This makes me so happy. Yay. It's awesome.